Welcome to Ku English Channel.
Bertrand Russell, The Logic of Freedom. Chapter 1, A Child of Two Worlds. Bertrand Arthur William Russell was born on May 18, 1872, into one of the most powerful and respected families in Britain. His family was rich, well-educated, and politically important. His grandfather, Lord John Russell, had been Prime Minister of Britain twice. His father, John Russell, was a lawyer and thinker who believed in personal freedom and progressive ideas. His mother, Catherine Russell, was known for her intelligence and love of science. Sadly, Bertrand's childhood was not a happy one. His mother and sister both died of disease when he was only 2 years old. His father died 2 years later. Bertrand was left alone with his older brother Frank, and the two boys were sent to live with their grandparents. Their new home was a big country house called Pembroke Lodge, located in Richmond Park, near London. Bertrand's grandmother, Countess Russell, became a strong influence in his life. She was a strict Christian and believed in living a moral and serious life. Although Bertrand respected her, he would later disagree with her religious views. In fact, these early experiences would shape many of his ideas about life, belief, and reason. As a child, Bertrand was quiet, thoughtful, and lonely. He often walked alone in the gardens of Pembroke Lodge, thinking deeply about life. He loved mathematics and enjoyed solving puzzles. He read many books, especially about science, history, and philosophy. Reading became his favorite escape from loneliness. At age 11, he found a book that changed his life, Euclid's Elements. It was an ancient Greek text about geometry. While reading it, Bertrand felt a deep excitement. He had discovered the beauty of logical thinking. He later wrote that reading Euclid was as great an event in my life as my first love. Bertrand was educated at home by private tutors. He was a fast learner and soon knew more than his teachers. He loved numbers and logic, but also asked big questions. What is truth? What is knowledge? How do we know what is real? During these early years, Russell began to doubt many of the ideas taught to him. While others accepted religion without question, he wanted proof. He started to develop a strong belief in reason, the power of human thinking to discover truth. These early experiences, losing his parents, being raised by his strict grandmother, and discovering logic and reason, formed the foundation of Bertrand Russell's future life. He became a man who would never stop asking questions, challenging traditions, and searching for clear, logical answers. His childhood may have been lonely, but it gave birth to a mind that would soon change the world. Chapter 2, The Cambridge Years. In 1890, when Bertrand Russell was 18, he went to Trinity College, part of the famous University of Cambridge. This was a turning point in his life. At Cambridge, he would meet great thinkers, form important friendships, and begin building his ideas about logic, mathematics, and philosophy. Trinity College was known for its excellence in mathematics. Bertrand studied hard and quickly impressed his teachers. He was especially interested in the works of Alfred North Whitehead, one of his professors. Whitehead became his mentor and later his co-author in one of the most famous works in mathematics. At Cambridge, Russell also met G.E. Moore, a young philosopher who believed that philosophy should be based on facts and careful analysis. This idea influenced Russell deeply. He began to believe that clarity of thought and logical reasoning were the keys to solving deep philosophical problems. Russell also joined the Cambridge Apostles, a secret discussion group of brilliant students and teachers. They met weekly to talk about philosophy, politics, art, and science. Members were encouraged to speak honestly and challenge each other's ideas. This group helped Russell develop the confidence to speak his mind and defend his views. During this time, Russell fell in love with Alice Pearsall Smith, an American Quaker. They got married in 1894. Alice was gentle, thoughtful, and deeply religious. But as time passed, Russell began to feel that their views were too different. He respected her, but he was moving toward a more logical and non-religious way of thinking. This difference would later lead to problems in their marriage. After graduation, Russell traveled to Germany and studied economic and political systems. He was interested in social justice, and he wanted to understand how to make the world better. This interest would later become a key part of his work. By the late 1890s, Russell was already publishing books and essays. His early works focused on geometry, space, and the structure of reality. He wanted to build a philosophy based on logic and facts, not on tradition, emotion, or blind faith. In 1900, Russell attended a conference in Paris where he learned about the work of Giuseppe Peano, an Italian mathematician. Peano's system of mathematical logic excited Russell. It made him believe that all of mathematics could be explained using logic alone. This idea became Russell's great mission. He returned to Cambridge with a new goal: to rebuild the foundation of mathematics using logic. He joined with his old mentor, Whitehead, to write a huge work called Principia Mathematica. It would take over 10 years to complete, but for Russell, it was a dream worth chasing. These years at Cambridge were full of learning, love, and discovery. Russell was now more than a brilliant student. He was becoming a major thinker. He believed that truth comes from reason and that philosophy must be clear, logical, and useful. The quiet boy from Pembroke Lodge had become a man with a powerful voice, and the world was beginning to listen. Chapter 3: The Logic Revolution. By the early 1900s, Bertrand Russell was fully dedicated to his grand project, building a solid foundation for mathematics using logic. Together with Alfred North Whitehead, he began working on a massive and difficult book that would try to prove that all of mathematics could be written as a series of logical steps. This book would later be called Principia Mathematica. It was a bold and ambitious idea. Russell believed that if mathematics could be shown to follow from logic alone, it would become more certain than ever before. There would be no need for guessing or unclear thinking. Everything would be based on clear definitions and step-by-step reasoning. But the work was not easy. Russell and Whitehead spent 10 long years writing Principia Mathematica. Each day, they tried to solve problems that had never been solved before. Often, they would work for weeks on a single page. Their goal was to prove even the simplest facts, like 1 + 1 = 2, using only logical symbols and rules. It took hundreds of pages to reach that simple result. Russell's dedication was amazing. He believed deeply in the power of reason. He thought that by showing the logical structure of mathematics, he could help bring clarity to the world, not just in math, but in philosophy, science, and even politics. In 1901, while working on the project, Russell discovered something strange. It was a problem so serious that it shook the foundations of logic. Today, we call it Russell's paradox. It came from thinking about sets, or groups of things. Imagine a set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition, it should not. But if it does not contain itself, then it should. This logical puzzle created a contradiction. It showed that even the basic rules of set theory could lead to problems. Russell's paradox was important. It showed that logic was more complicated than people had thought. It also meant that building mathematics on logic would require great care. Many later mathematicians and philosophers, like Kurt Gödel, would continue to explore the limits of logic and certainty. But Russell's discovery helped start that important conversation. In 1910, the first volume of Principia Mathematica was finally published. 2 more volumes followed. Though the book was extremely difficult to read, full of symbols and technical language, it became one of the most important works in modern logic. It changed the way people thought about mathematics and philosophy. At the same time, Russell began writing for a wider audience. He wanted more people to understand philosophy. In 1912, he published The Problems of Philosophy, a short book that asked simple but deep questions. What can we know? What is truth? What is real? This book was very different from Principia Mathematica. It used clear English and gave readers a path into the world of philosophy. Russell was beginning to see that philosophy was not just for experts, it was something everyone could think about. In this period, Russell also began teaching at Cambridge again. One of his students was Ludwig Wittgenstein, an Austrian thinker who would later become a major philosopher in his own right. Russell believed Wittgenstein had a brilliant mind, but also saw that he was deeply troubled. Their relationship was complex, full of respect and tension. Russell's life during these years was filled with ideas, teaching, and writing. But changes were coming both in his personal life and in the world. The calm of the early 20th century was about to be broken by war, and Bertrand Russell, the philosopher of logic, would soon become a voice of peace. Chapter 4: A Voice Against War. In 1914, World War I broke out in Europe. It was a war unlike any before. Millions of soldiers fought in terrible conditions. New weapons like machine guns and poison gas made the battlefield a nightmare. Countries across the world were pulled into the conflict, and many young lives were lost. Bertrand Russell was shocked by the war. He believed it was not only tragic, but also unnecessary. He saw it as the result of fear, nationalism, and bad leadership. While many supported the war with patriotic feelings, Russell stood apart. He believed in peace, logic, and individual conscience. From the beginning, Russell spoke out against the war. He gave public speeches, wrote articles, and signed petitions. He argued that young men should not be forced to fight and die for political reasons they did not understand. He supported conscientious objectors, men who refused to fight because of their personal beliefs. This was a brave and risky position. Many people saw him as unpatriotic, even as a traitor. Newspapers attacked him. Friends turned away. The British government took action. In 1916, Russell lost his teaching position at Trinity College because of his anti-war views. But Russell did not stop. He continued writing and speaking, even though it brought him more trouble. In 1917, he was fined for writing an article that criticized the government's treatment of American soldiers. A year later, in 1918, he was sent to prison for 6 months for opposing the war too strongly. Russell's time in prison was difficult, but he used it wisely. He read, thought, and wrote. He later said that he was almost happier in prison than in freedom because he had time to think deeply. While there, he wrote Introduction to Mathematical Philosophy, a book that explained his ideas in simple language for general readers. After the war ended in 1918, Russell continued to speak about peace, education, and justice. He believed that the world needed more rational thinking and less violence. He wanted people to solve their problems through discussion, not war. At the same time, Russell's personal life was changing. His marriage to Alice had become cold and distant. They finally separated in 1921. That same year, Russell visited Soviet Russia to see the new communist government for himself. At first, he was hopeful. He wanted to believe in a better system. But after seeing the situation in Russia, he was deeply disappointed. He found the government too controlling and the people too afraid. He wrote a book called The Practice and Theory of Bolshevism, where he shared his mixed feelings, support for equality, but criticism of dictatorship. In 1921, he also married his second wife, Dora Black, a writer and educator. Together, they started an experimental school that focused on freedom and creativity for children. The school was a reflection of Russell's belief in reason, kindness, and independent thought. As the 1920s moved forward, Russell became more famous, not just as a logician and philosopher, but as a public thinker. He wrote books and essays on many topics: education, marriage, religion, and politics. He wanted to use his mind to help people live better lives. He had lived through war, prison, and personal change, but his commitment to truth and peace remained strong. The world was changing fast, and Bertrand Russell was determined to be part of the conversation. His voice was clear, logical, and passionate, and people were starting to listen more than ever before. Chapter 5: Love, Education, and Public Thought. The 1920s were a time of personal and intellectual growth for Bertrand Russell. After the war, he had become more than a philosopher. He was now a well-known public thinker, respected and criticized in equal measure. He used his fame to share ideas not only about logic and politics, but also about love, marriage, and education. In 1921, shortly after separating from his first wife, Alice, Russell married Dora Black, a writer and social activist. Dora shared many of his ideals, especially about education and personal freedom. Together, they wanted to create a new way of raising children, one that avoided strict rules and allowed young minds to grow freely. In 1927, they founded the Beacon Hill School, an experimental school in Sussex, England. The school was based on progressive ideas. Children were encouraged to think for themselves, ask questions, and make their own decisions. There were no punishments or forced learning. Russell believed that true education should teach children how to think, not just what to think. The school reflected Russell's deep belief in freedom of thought. He wanted children to become adults who could think clearly, act with kindness, and make decisions based on reason, not fear. Although Beacon Hill School was small and didn't last long, it became a symbol of Russell's lifelong interest in using education to build a better society. During this time, Russell was also writing books for the general public. One of his most famous works, Marriage and Morals, 1929, explored changing views on love, sex, and family. He argued that many traditional ideas about marriage were outdated and harmful. He believed that people should be free to love without shame, and that society should treat men and women equally. These views were very modern for the time and very controversial. Many people were shocked by Russell's ideas. Some thought he was attacking traditional values. Others admired his honesty and bravery in discussing difficult topics openly. In 1931, Russell's personal life changed again. His marriage with Dora began to fall apart. They had 2 children together, John and Kate, but their relationship became strained. Dora had other romantic relationships, and so did Russell. The freedom they both believed in also created emotional distance between them. They separated a few years later. Despite these personal struggles, Russell remained active in public life. He continued giving lectures, writing essays, and participating in public debates. He believed that ideas should be shared openly, and he never stopped speaking his mind. In 1931, Russell received the title of Earl Russell after the death of his older brother. This made him a member of the British nobility, with a seat in the House of Lords. But he rarely used the title and didn't take part in the traditional duties. His heart remained with the people, not the aristocracy. The 1930s were also a time of growing danger. Around the world, new threats were rising: fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, and economic depression in many countries. Russell watched these developments with great concern. He feared that the world was heading toward another disaster. He continued to speak out for peace, reason, and justice. He warned against blind nationalism and the rise of dictators. His voice, though often unpopular, was always clear. Freedom and truth must be protected, even when it's hard. As the world moved toward another war, Russell prepared himself once again to be a voice of courage and conscience. He was no longer just a logician. He was a philosopher of life, love, education, and humanity. Chapter 6: Facing Fascism and Defending Democracy. The late 1930s brought new and terrifying challenges to Europe and the world. Adolf Hitler had risen to power in Germany. Benito Mussolini ruled Italy, and war clouds were gathering over Europe once again. Bertrand Russell, now in his 60s, watched these events with alarm. Russell had always believed in peace. He had gone to prison during World War I for opposing violence. But this time, he faced a moral dilemma. He saw that fascism, especially the kind brought by Hitler, was not just another political idea. It was a dangerous force that crushed freedom, encouraged hate, and destroyed truth. In 1938, Russell wrote that pacifism, the belief in never using violence, might not be enough. While he still hated war, he believed that allowing Hitler to take over Europe would lead to even greater suffering. It was a difficult choice, but Russell believed that defending democracy was sometimes necessary, even if it meant fighting. This shift in his views showed Russell's ability to think honestly and change his mind when needed. He was never a man who followed simple rules. He always asked, what is the most reasonable thing to do based on the facts. At the same time, Russell's views on religion continued to challenge many people. In 1927, he had given a famous lecture called Why I Am Not a Christian. In it, he explained why he didn't believe in God or in any traditional religion. He argued that beliefs should be based on evidence and reason, not on tradition or fear. This lecture became one of his most well-known and widely read works. Many people admired him for speaking clearly and honestly about such a sensitive subject. Others were angry and accused him of attacking faith. But Russell was not trying to insult believers. He was encouraging people to think for themselves. In 1939, just as World War II began, Russell accepted a position to teach at UCLA in California. He hoped to escape the growing dangers in Europe and continue his work in peace. However, controversy followed him across the ocean. In 1940, Russell was invited to teach at the City College of New York. But when some people discovered his earlier writings about love and marriage, they said he was morally unfit to teach. A court agreed, and Russell lost the job before he ever started. This event was deeply unfair, and many leading intellectuals supported him. But it also showed how strong public fear and moral judgment could silence even the greatest thinkers. Russell returned to California, disappointed but not defeated. During World War II, Russell took a more complex position. He believed that Hitler must be stopped, but he also warned that the world should not forget the values of peace and humanity. He criticized both Nazi violence and the Allied use of terrible weapons, like the bombing of civilian cities. After the war ended in 1945, a new threat appeared: the nuclear bomb. The United States had used atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Russell was horrified. He now had a new mission: to warn the world about nuclear war. He believed that the future of humanity was in danger and that people must act quickly to stop the spread of these terrible weapons. In his later life, this became one of his most important causes. He spoke to world leaders, joined peace movements, and helped write the Russell-Einstein Manifesto in 1955, calling for nuclear disarmament. His partner in this cause was another great thinker, Albert Einstein. Even as he grew older, Russell remained active, sharp, and courageous. He had faced kings, courts, wars, and prisons, and never stopped fighting for truth. He believed that logic and reason could save humanity, and now, more than ever, the world needed to listen. Chapter 7: The Philosopher of Peace. After World War II, the world was filled with both hope and fear. On one hand, the terrible war had ended. On the other hand, a new danger had appeared: the nuclear bomb. The destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 had shown the world the power of this new weapon. Now, humans had the ability to destroy the planet. Bertrand Russell, already in his 70s, saw this as the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. He knew that war was terrible, but nuclear war would be the end of civilization. He believed that people could not afford to think in the old ways. They had to learn new habits, habits of peace, cooperation, and international understanding. In the 1950s, Russell became one of the world's most active voices for nuclear disarmament. He believed that science had brought great power to humans, but without wisdom and moral responsibility, that power would destroy us. He started writing articles and giving speeches warning of the dangers of atomic weapons. One of his most important acts came in 1955, when he and Albert Einstein, the famous physicist, together released the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. This powerful document called on world leaders to think not as enemies, but as members of one human race. It urged them to avoid war and solve conflicts through peaceful talks. The manifesto ended with the now famous words, "Remember your humanity, and forget the rest." Russell's passion for peace led him to help form the Pugwash conferences, international meetings where scientists and thinkers from different countries could come together to discuss how to stop nuclear war. These meetings were important during the Cold War, a time when the US and the Soviet Union were in deep conflict. But Russell didn't only speak to scientists, he spoke to everyone. He gave radio talks, appeared on television, and wrote books that explained complex ideas in simple language. He wanted ordinary people to understand the danger, to care, and to act. His fame grew again. Young people, especially in the 1950s and 60s, saw him as a wise elder who spoke truth to power. Even at nearly 90 years old, Russell marched in protests, was arrested for civil disobedience, and stood beside students and peace activists. One of his most powerful ideas was that governments should not be above morality. Just because a government was powerful did not mean it was right. Russell believed that citizens had a duty to question authority when it acted unfairly or dangerously. At the same time, he never gave up his belief in reason. He believed that most problems could be solved if people were willing to think clearly, listen to each other, and be honest about their fears and hopes. In 1950, Bertrand Russell received the Nobel Prize in Literature, not for his fiction, but for his clear and courageous writing in support of human rights and freedom of thought. It was a great honor and recognition of a lifetime spent fighting for truth and justice. Russell was not afraid to speak against popular opinion. He criticized both the US and the Soviet Union when he thought they were wrong. He spoke out against colonialism, racism, and any kind of unfair treatment of people. In the last decades of his life, Russell was more than a philosopher. He had become a moral leader for the modern age. He used his words, his wisdom, and his reputation to build a better world. He knew he would not live to see all the changes he wanted, but he believed that hope was a duty, that even when things seem dark, we must still act to make the future brighter. Chapter 8. The Last Years and Legacy. In the final years of his life, Bertrand Russell remained active, passionate, and deeply involved in world affairs. Even in his 90s, he worked every day, writing, speaking, and taking part in movements for peace and justice. He had lived through 2 world wars, the rise and fall of empires, and the birth of nuclear weapons. But his spirit was not broken. He believed that the human mind, when used with care and kindness, could still solve the problems of the world. In 1961, at the age of 89, Russell was arrested again. He had joined a non-violent protest against nuclear weapons near London. When asked if he knew he was breaking the law, Russell replied with calm courage, "Yes, but I believe the law is wrong." He was sent to prison for 1 week. Reporters came to ask him how he felt about it. He answered with a smile and said that he had brought enough books to keep him busy. To the end, Russell believed that the mind must remain free no matter where the body was. Russell also became involved in the Vietnam War protests in the 1960s. He strongly opposed the US bombing of Vietnam and saw it as a new kind of imperialism. In 1966, he helped organize the International War Crimes Tribunal, sometimes called the Russell Tribunal. Its goal was to investigate and document war crimes during the Vietnam War. Though the tribunal had no legal power, it had moral weight. Russell wanted the world to pay attention to human suffering, not just to politics or power. He believed that even the most powerful nations must be held responsible for their actions. At this time, Russell was also writing his final autobiography. The book, published in 3 volumes between 1967 and 1969, was titled The Autobiography of Bertrand Russell. In it, he told the story of his life, his thoughts, and his feelings. He wrote honestly about his mistakes, his doubts, and his hopes. One of his most famous quotes comes from this book. "3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life: the longing for love, the search for knowledge, and unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind." These words capture the heart of Russell's life. He was a man of reason, but also of great emotion. He loved deeply, thought deeply, and cared deeply for the world. Russell died on February 2, 1970, at the age of 97. By then, he had become one of the most famous philosophers in history. People across the globe, scientists, writers, teachers, and students, mourned his passing. But his ideas did not die. His books continue to be read. His logic is still studied. His thoughts on war, peace, education, and freedom remain part of the global conversation. What made Bertrand Russell unique was not only his intelligence, but his courage to think independently. He was not afraid to change his mind. He was not afraid to speak the truth, even when it made others uncomfortable. He showed the world that philosophy is not just about old books. It is about how we live, how we treat others, and how we imagine the future. Russell once said, "To teach how to live without certainty, and yet without being paralyzed by hesitation, is perhaps the chief thing that philosophy can do." In a world full of complexity and conflict, Russell offered a compass, reason, love, and a deep sense of human responsibility. He is gone, but his voice still echoes for anyone willing to listen. Chapter 9: A Voice for Justice. Across the World. As Bertrand Russell entered his 90s, most people would have slowed down, but not him. Even as his body aged, his mind stayed active and sharp. He continued to fight for what he believed in, especially in the areas of human rights, freedom of speech, and international justice. One of the most powerful parts of Russell's later years was his commitment to speaking out on global injustice, especially when others remained silent. He believed that silence in the face of injustice was not neutral, it was harmful. Russell was deeply involved in the opposition to the Vietnam War, and he criticized both the violence of the war and the failure of the world's leaders to stop it. He saw the bombing campaigns, especially those that killed civilians, as crimes that should not be ignored. For him, every life, whether Western or Asian, was equally valuable. In 1966, at age 94, Russell helped organize the Russell Tribunal to investigate war crimes committed during the Vietnam War. Though the tribunal had no legal power, it had great symbolic power. The goal was not to punish, but to expose the truth. Russell believed that moral responsibility should not be limited by borders. The tribunal brought together writers, philosophers, and legal experts from many countries. They heard witnesses, collected evidence, and published their findings for the world to see. Russell did not attend the meetings in person due to his health, but he wrote powerful letters and statements that were read aloud. In one statement, he said, "We are often told to let the past be past, but if injustice is not remembered, it is repeated." He believed that truth-telling was the first step toward peace. At the same time, Russell continued to speak about freedom of speech. He defended the right of people to express unpopular opinions, even if he disagreed with them. He knew from personal experience what it felt like to be silenced or judged. As someone who had once been jailed for his views, he never forgot the importance of open debate. Russell also continued to write letters to world leaders. He wrote to US President Lyndon B. Johnson, Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, and even leaders in developing countries. His letters were respectful but direct. He warned them about the dangers of unchecked power, war, and the loss of human dignity. In 1967, he helped establish the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation, which worked to support peace campaigns, publish research, and organize international cooperation. The foundation became a center for ideas about peace, justice, and global ethics. Russell was also concerned about poverty and inequality. He believed that peace was not just about the absence of war, but also about giving people the chance to live meaningful lives. He supported efforts to improve education, healthcare, and basic rights in poorer parts of the world. In his last years, Russell continued to meet with students, answer letters, and give interviews. People from all over the world, young and old, wrote to him for advice. Some asked about politics, some about philosophy, and some about love and life. He answered as many letters as he could, always taking time to listen and offer thoughtful responses. Though he was often critical of governments and institutions, Russell always remained hopeful about individual people. He believed that the average person, if given the chance to think and speak freely, would choose kindness over cruelty, peace over violence, and truth over lies. His life was proof that one person with a clear voice and a deep commitment to justice could make a difference across the globe. Chapter 10: The Legacy of Bertrand Russell. On February 2, 1970, Bertrand Russell passed away peacefully at the age of 97. He died in Wales, surrounded by those who cared for him, including his fourth wife, Edith. Though his body was gone, his ideas remained alive and more powerful than ever. Russell had lived almost a full century, and in that time he had become one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. His legacy was not just in philosophy, but in education, politics, science, and public life. He had touched almost every major topic of his age. So what exactly did Bertrand Russell leave behind? First, he left a revolution in logic and mathematics. His early work helped create the foundation for modern analytical philosophy and computer science. Without Russell and his collaborator Alfred North Whitehead, much of today's logic systems and technology-based reasoning might not exist. Second, he left a new way to think about philosophy itself. For Russell, philosophy was not just about reading old books or thinking in circles. It was about asking honest questions, seeking truth through reason, and improving the human condition. He once said, "Philosophy is to be studied not for the sake of any definite answers, but for the sake of the questions themselves." This humble and open attitude inspired generations of students and thinkers. Third, Russell gave the world an example of moral courage. He was never afraid to speak his mind, even when it meant prison, loss of job, or public criticism. He believed that speaking the truth was more important than being popular or comfortable. In times of war, he spoke for peace. In times of fear, he spoke for reason. In times of silence, he spoke for justice. Fourth, Russell's writings, especially his books for general readers, have helped millions of people understand difficult ideas in clear language. Books like The Problems of Philosophy, Why I Am Not a Christian, The Conquest of Happiness, and Marriage and Morals are still widely read today. They continue to challenge readers to think, question, and grow. Fifth, Russell's influence spread far beyond the classroom. He inspired peace movements, civil rights campaigns, educational reform, and global cooperation. His work with Einstein, the Pugwash Conferences, and the Peace Foundation showed that ideas can change the world when they are shared with honesty and courage. But perhaps his greatest legacy was the example of his life, a man who combined reason with compassion, who fought for peace with the tools of logic, who sought truth even when it was uncomfortable, and who believed in humanity even when humanity made terrible mistakes. Russell once wrote a message to future generations. He said, "Love is wise, hatred is foolish. In this world, which is getting more and more closely connected, we must learn to tolerate each other. We must learn to live together, or we shall die together." These words remain as true today as when he first spoke them. Bertrand Russell's journey from a lonely child in a strict Victorian home to a global symbol of reason and hope reminds us all of the power of thought. Not cold thought, but thought guided by love, truth, and the desire to make the world a better place. For English learners and thinkers of all ages, his story offers not only a lesson in language, but a lesson in life. His voice may be quiet now, but his ideas continue to speak clear, brave, and full of light.